Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. We are here today at the Business Exit Summit, and I'm delighted to be sitting with Lisa Merryweather, who's the founder of LM Synergy and one of our fantastic panelists today, speaking on the topic of how to achieve a high-valued exit. Lisa has a very unique background. She's a former M&A partner who's worked on deals with brands like Mimco, New Farm, and Visi, and now focusing on something quite different, calling herself a founder, exit, and transaction mentor. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Lisa, I love how you describe exits as a marathon. So most people think that it's just about the numbers and the deal. But can you tell us what made you realize that the founder's personal journey was just as important as the business side?
Yes, and there's a lot in that, and you've touched on founder, the marathon part, and also the personal journey aspect. Yeah. And so from the marathon piece, I think what happens is that a founder can focus on the business a lot and the business preparation piece, and then get into the actual kickoff process part of the journey, and think that it's just a short period of time until they exit, and then all of a sudden they find themselves like in a longer journey, and a journey that has a lot more obstacles and ups and downs than what they ever imagined. And they're starting to respond to things from an emotional perspective rather than from a really clear and calm perspective, because some of those things haven't been anticipated. They're a bit blindsided in the process.
Yeah, correct. No, that completely makes sense. Now, you mentioned that advisors advise companies, not founders. So what does that actually look like in practice? Like, can you give us an example of what founders are dealing with that their traditional advisors might miss?
And thank you for asking that, because there is a slight difference too, depending on what kind of founder you are. So are you a majority founder? So you control maybe sort of 80% of the company, maybe 100%, and in that case, a lot of your interests are aligned between company and founder, at least from the transactional advice that's being given. So that piece is covered a little bit more than normal. Then obviously a founder who's a minority shareholder, their personal interests can divert quite a lot from the company advice they're receiving. So that's one aspect of where the divergence occurs. And then obviously the other aspect is that a founder can be well advised from a tax perspective, a business perspective, the numbers, and they may be asked to answer questions about what they want personally, but there's no real space to help them process what that is. So those personal questions that can drive the transaction in the first place aren't necessarily being dealt with, especially when you're in the transaction space.
Absolutely, that makes sense. It's like having a personal trainer while having a gym membership. Now, let's talk about preparation then. So you have this framework before, during, and after the marathon. So could you walk me through what preparing for the marathon actually means? That is it something like that a founder is watching this, thinking about an exit 2 to 3 years ago? What should they be doing right now?
Well, luckily, we've got this amazing summit which is alerting founders to the fact that their business needs to be prepared at least 2 to 3 years out. So there's that aspect of just getting prepared before the transaction. And that is a large part of it, let's be real. But also, let's look at a founder's personal part in this journey. If they're about to go into an exit process and they're burnt out or they're dealing with other things in their personal life, or they haven't actually even thought about the fact that this exit means them having a new identity afterwards, after the transaction. If none of that is sort of dealt with, then that can absolutely affect the value that they were going to receive in the transaction. So there's a real value implication, but there's a real personal implication too. You know, trying to run that marathon when you're already burnt out at the start, it's a big thing to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you agree with this, that a founder should start looking at the exit strategy when, they are just like setting up their business, or when would be the right time for them to think about it?
Well, look, it really depends on who you speak to, but it's never too early from an exit advisor's perspective.
Right.
So a lot of the time a founder can be making an exit decision and not realising it. So structuring is a big piece. It's a very big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And also then the time frame. The time frame can be 10 years to exit if you're doing it really intentionally. So never too early to start because a lot of the practical steps that you take to be exit ready just really also dovetail nicely into having a strong, well-running company that supports you ultimately as an individual, as a business owner as well. So most of the time they're quite aligned.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah, very well said. Now, let's talk about, so you mentioned helping founders regulate through the highs and the lows. So for someone who hasn't been through this before, what does an emotional roller coaster of exiting look like?
Oh, look, it can be very specific, but let's look at it this way. The early stage, say once you've kicked off the process, so I'm talking you've engaged a corporate advisor, for example, and you're starting to run a sale process. So in that part, you could have an emotional low because the bidders that you thought were going to be out there aren't showing up. Or you could be at the other extreme and feeling like you're on top of the world because you've got lots of offers coming in and you're on an emotional high, right? And then you get into the middle part of the transaction and basically you move from being sort of championed and told how great you are from buyers all over the world to then one buyer having a very deep dive look into your company. And that can feel quite confronting because they're starting to really unpick a lot of decisions that you've made perhaps personally as a founder. So if we haven't anticipated that is going to happen and anticipated some of your possible responses to that, you can start taking things personally and start reacting rather than just taking it as part of the process and responding rationally to that journey and acknowledging that it is going to perhaps sting a little bit, but just push on through. So
it's part of the journey, so you have to go through the process. Now this brings me to something that our audience would relate to, so the identity question. So after the deal closes, you help founders figure out what's next for them. So there must be this moment when someone who's like CEO of an XYZ company for 15 years suddenly isn't anymore. So how do people handle that massive identity shift?
Yes, there's a bit of debate at the moment too, and I guess it's very personal as to at what stage of the journey do you start that on. So do you start that before exit so that you've got a bit of a runway and something to move straight into afterwards, or do you sort of allow yourself a bit of space after the exit to sort of regroup and then move on? And I think it's quite a personal situation. It will depend on how much headspace you have personally to be able to process it before exit. Can be a little bit hard to be trying to imagine what you're doing afterwards when you're still very much in the day-to-day business or the business ownership. So regardless of which one you do decide or which one is right for you, at least knowing that there is going to be scaffolding afterwards that will help you walk through that journey and help you process that and work out what is right for you, I think is a big first step. And also normalising that. So anticipating that there's a high chance I'll experience certain very common reactions that most founders experience after exiting, and rather than being surprised by them, sort of just knowing, well, that is part of the journey, and referring to the scaffolding that you've already put in place so that you know you've got a process to work through it after you've been to the beach. That's a very important first step.
Definitely. And then understanding that, they're not alone in the journey. And especially now that we have a lot of resources. I know that I was just having a chat with another speaker sometime back, and they mentioned exiting a business back in the 1980s where obviously they didn't have the resources and it was very difficult. But now there's so much that is happening in the industry and the help is available out there. So which is really good for mentor for the founders. Now, given all your experience on both sides, so as the lawyer facilitating deals and now as a mentor supporting founders, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned about founders going through exits?
Yeah. Look, a lot, and luckily for them, I'm bound by confidentiality, so I won't say too much. But I guess but one of the things that did always surprise me when I was in transactional services was just this piece that I referred to earlier, which is being quite blindsided by the process and sort of being in it and then discovering as they go. So that always surprised me, and I guess that is part of why I want to do this work at the front end.
Definitely.
Also sort of being on, like having chosen a bus and being on that journey and then realising partway through that it's misaligned with crucial values, for example. So values discussions that aren't being done early enough. And that might not mean that you don't choose that bus. You might still get on that bus because it's the appropriate one, but at least you're fully aware and you're making conscious decisions before you're in the journey. You're making them like in advance. So that's what I'd
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Now, let's say someone watching this interview would be thinking that I want to sell my business in the next few years. So what's the one thing that you'll want them to know that nobody talks about in all the deal-making advice out there?
Look, you made the point earlier, which is going back, and I know it's hard to believe that I can go back sort of 20, 30 years in this sort of industry, but, you know, a long time ago, a lot of these discussions weren't being had at all. Yeah. So we're definitely further down the path. But things like, I would say, how you're going to experience it personally is perhaps being touched on. So thankfully we're now having discussions about purpose and what it's going to mean for you after the transaction, and there's a lot more talk around that, which is amazing. I think more talk around the actual experience for the founder when they're in the journey and sort of before the journey. I think that needs more help and assistance. It's actually probably being talked about in the sense of, please give me answers to these questions. So, hey, tell me where you'd like to be in 5 years. How about you go and work out your purpose? But no, not as much help, especially from the advisors. They're not skilled in this, and nor should they be, really. I mean, that's a very high billable hour to be working on purpose. So, so basically the scaffolding and somebody to help you work out those aspects from somebody who's got transactional experience. I think there's a bit of a gap.
Yeah,
there.
Absolutely. Very well said, Lisa. Now, before we wrap up our interview today, we are here today at the Business Exit Summit. So can you share any key takeaways from your day, and how's your experience been being here today?
No, it's been a great morning. I've heard a lot of really good speakers with different experience. So individual business owners who've exited, and then the advisors who are advising them from different perspectives. So I was keen to hear about the entrepreneurial acquisition sort of market that's just opening up in Australia, but probably in its infancy compared to, say, the US. So that was a good takeaway for me, to sort of know that it does exist, but it probably still needs a little bit of momentum to be taking off to the same extent. So the other key takeaways were that we're talking more about business preparation, but we're still talking about it. You know, I was talking about that 15 years ago, and as somebody said in one of the sessions, we have to hear something 7 times before we start actioning it, and maybe we need to hear it for 15 years before we start actioning it. But, you know, those messages are still being said, thankfully, because we need it.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, thank you to our viewers for tuning in. I hope you found this interview as insightful as I did. I look forward to you. I look forward to having you all join us in my next conversation. And thank you, Lisa, for sharing all your insights about your journey. I'm sure that our audience gained a lot of knowledge from your experience. And thank you for your time.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.